So this is parchment coffee. You may hear that term a lot, and it's not really evident exactly what it is, because if you are a coffee roaster or a coffee drinker, you're not going to see this. This is an intermediate stage in the wet process. And what parchment means, and you may get a little hint right here by that nick in the bean, is that it's a coating called parchment just because it's like a stiff paper. And I set up these three here to show you. So here you have the whole parchment and one that I peeled off the end. And so you can see the green bean poking through, and you see a gap in there between the green bean and the parchment. There's a kind of air space, and this is the green bean, which is a seed, and as you can see, it still has some of this what becomes silver skin and comes off as chaff when you roast, stuck to it, which is actually sort of a continuous part of the parchment. So when the green coffee is just processed, it fills out the entire cavity of the parchment. It's swollen with water, and it dries down within the parchment layer and separates from it. So in a way, the parchment is like a little barrier to a kind of inner atmosphere that the green bean is drying in. And that's important in several ways, is that this parchment is very good quality. It's getting a little bit old, so I see it's a little bit yellowing in some of the beans, but it's from a washing station in Rwanda. It's one of the few washing stations where they still use a old double fermentation style, which is common in Kenya or a lot of Burundi. And what you notice about it is that this parchment is very intact. It almost looks like the green bean itself. It has the split, the cleft down the flat side, and but it's very intact. It's not cracked and split. And what you see a lot of other places, here, I'll put one over here, is this kind of thing, or much more dramatically, where the coffee's opened up. It's not bad. It doesn't mean the coffee's bad, but what it does mean is that the parchment's not acting as a barrier anymore and doesn't have a sort of like atmosphere in there. And I think that helps with quality. It certainly slows down and sort of evens the drying process out. There's only one place in the world where people really dry green coffee like this out on the patios, and that's in Indonesia, where they trade in wet coffee, buy wet coffee, and then they peel it when it's still wet using a high sort of friction huller, and then they take the green bean and lay it out in the patio. Well, you have to be extra sanitary because this is the product you ultimately roast. So what's nice about wet processed coffee is it's sort of in a sort of, I guess you could say, little protective sanitary layer when it's laid out to dry. And it also dries just directly with sun on it, oftentimes. And that means a very harsh, uneven drying, potentially. So that's a little about parchment coffee, looking at it up close. Now here's a little trick. What is this? So a lot of people would say, well, that's parchment coffee. That's coffee that's still in the parchment layer. Well, here's parchment coffee right here. As you can see, it's got this outer layer. This, just because I had it laying around, is monsooned coffee. This is not in a parchment layer. This is actually what's typically a green bean that's turned white because it's been exposed to moisture in a controlled way that it doesn't mold, it doesn't mildew, it doesn't supposedly get damaged. It's sort of a form of damage that still results in a drinkable coffee. Some may argue that. This is definitely not, third wave specialty coffee, neat, sweet, clean coffee. It's sort of spicy, weird, pungent, foresty, low acidity, very funky, and probably something that would be considered defective in a lot of countries, but it's one of the many flavors in coffee that's currently out of vogue, but is sort of interesting, especially if you put sugar in it or using it in espresso with milk drinks and really want a pungent flavor. I am actually scared to open this container. I am actually scared to open this container of coffee and pour any out. I know, it's out of focus. The reason is because it's gotten all disgusting and moldy. And the reason it got all moldy is because it was all wet. This is C-grade coffee, C-grade parchment. This is, oh, geez, it stinks. It just smells like, an outdoor compost pile, basically, which is what it is. Okay, here it is, C-grade coffee. C-grade parchment coffee from Rwanda. So I showed you before that Rwanda A-grade, A1 parchment is some of the cleanest, most beautiful parchment in the world. And let's just go over and take a look at that. This is really just the model of what parchment coffee should look like. Wet process parchment coffee, unsplit, uncracked, blonde color, just really clean, good smell. Sometimes it smells like butter or honey when you smell it. This is the reject stuff. This is the stuff from the mill that is floaters, which is light coffee that's not overmature, immature. Cherries where one cherry failed to develop and it sort of is floated off by the machines. It's coffee that might have even been picked off the ground. It comes in discolored. Oftentimes in Rwanda, it's coffee that was picked days before and sat in a bag somewhere and got old. So it comes in and has a kind of, the color sort of, let's say like this one right here. Luckily, look, I have a Rwandan piece of wood that came with it too. But this is what low-grade coffee looks like. It's a little fuzzier than it would be. But this is pretty much what I picked up at the station. They were wondering why in the world I wanted to show this, but the fact is this comes from a great washing station called Muhororo, and all the good stations produce bad coffee too, and they do it because it's what's rejected when you take out, when you extract the good coffee, or when a farmer comes in and one farmer couldn't make it last week and they still have a bag of cherries that have been fermenting in their farm, and they have to sell that too along with their good coffee. So the quality comes really from the discrimination at all stages in that sort of agricultural chain to shed off lower qualities. And yet, it's not like people don't trade in the low qualities. They need to buy all grades of coffee. They need to keep the farmers happy, and so that they'll keep delivering good coffee. And so it's really by that process of eliminating the bad from the good that you get quality. So bad coffee comes from good stations. Just doesn't come from, let's say people might have imagined that there's these multinationals just bulking coffee from indiscriminately and such. But a lot of that coffee that goes into roasted and ground coffee that's never sold as whole beans, so you can sort of hide the appearance of it, for good reason, as you can see, comes from nice farms, maybe like this one. 1,800 meters, beautiful, but let me tell you, I'm not drinking this cup right here. We had a customer that went to Cuba and wanted to share with us some of the coffee that he bought in the marketplace there. And it was really interesting because Cuba has a long history in the coffee business. It was very famous. This, however, is probably not the reason why Cuba had any kind of good name in coffee in the past. The reason is what you're looking at. You may get some hints here. Now look at the shape. It's very rounded. Look at the sort of pointedness on the ends. Like, look here. Where am I? Right, like here. See this one? Quite pointed. And another thing, that straight line. And a slight curve to it, but not sort of that squiggle that you might normally see. So this is Robusta. It's a very small bean, Robusta. It has a certain amount of pea berry, so it's kind of, some of them are rounded because they're pea berry. And it's very low grade. It's not the lowest grade, really. But one of the telltale signs here, the actual worst bean here, I see insect damage, I see all sorts of stuff, is actually this one right here. That's a full black bean. And black beans produce these kind of stinker cups that are really atrocious. And this thing, my God, I just don't know what that is. This is another black bean, actually, right next to it, though. And this thing here, that's a black bean. Anyway, Robusta has that kind of really bitter truck stop flavor. It usually lacks sweetness as a rule. And when you get really clean Robusta, you can sort of drink it. You can bear it. I've had that and I sort of enjoyed it, but then I wouldn't really choose to take it home on the weekend. And you do see insect damage here, for example here. A lot of times with insect damage, you'll see the kind of molds that they bring in. There's sort of greenish color around the insect damage, where molds have a chance to take root in the coffee, or other sort of infections. Anyway, this is just another foray into the other world of coffee. The reason why good coffee is good is because we can define it against nasty, bitter coffee. And I certainly hope Cuba can revive their coffee industry and produce quality coffee, but Robusta is not generally a pathway to that end of the market. Anyway, it's fun, and I really actually enjoy and thank the customer for sharing this sample with us. It's very interesting to see. I didn't even know they grew Robusta in Cuba.